One of the last thing that remains with relationship is many-to-many relationship. Now we have book and author. Author can have many books and books can have more than one author. So we need a many-to-many relationship between two. Within .NET 5, the preview version that I am on right now, it does not support this by default. They have planned to add this by the time the .NET 5 ships fully in November of 2020. So till then, we have to work like the old days that we used to do before .NET 5. So if you are using .NET Core 3.1 or any other version, you need a mapping table to establish many-to-many relationship. Once .NET 5 is fully published, I will also upload a video on how to do with the new feature, but this is how you can do before .NET 5 in any of the .NET Core versions. Here we are adding a mapping table called as book author. Book author will have a reference foreign key to the book ID as well as the author ID. And inside book and author, both will contain a list of book author object. So that way it will map everything together to have many-to-many relationship. So in a book, you can have all of the authors of that book, and in author class, you can have a list of all of the books that are present for that author. This might seem daunting at first, but it is pretty simple to implement. Let's take a look at that in action. Let me switch back to the application and first create a book author class. So right here, we'll go to Solution Explorer. In Models, we will add a new class and we'll call this book author. We'll make it a public class. And in here, we need two properties. First will be integer, that will be book_ID, and later will also be an integer of author_ID. With that, we need navigation properties to navigate to book and author. So we'll do prop, we have book, and we'll do prop for author as author. Perfect, this looks good for the book author class. But if you remember with Entity Framework Core, we have a requirement. We need all of the entities to have a primary key. Now primary key can also be composite key. It is not required that you need a primary key. It is not required that only one column can be a primary key. In this case, book ID and author ID are combined to become a primary key of book author class. As of right now, if you have a composite key, you cannot do something like this. So you cannot define both of the keys like this and add it to the database. It will yield an error message. So how do we define a composite key? First, let me add this to the application DB context. Perfect. Now the next thing is defining a composite key. I have said this many times that we can do this with data annotations or Fluent API. This is one of the things that can only be done with Fluent API right now. And how do you configure Fluent API in your application? Fluent API will be configured inside the DB context, which is the application DB context. Right here inside the class, we have to override the onModelCreating. So we'll have the protected, override, its void, and then we have to type on model creating. Inside the parameters here, we will get a model builder. Let's call this model builder, and there we go. In here, we configure Fluent API. So Fluent API has a certain syntax to it. I will go into the details of all the syntax in Fluent API, but the first thing that we want to do is we want a composite key. We do that on this object, which is model builder. So what we will do on model builder is dot, we have the entity there, and which entity this will be. Entity defines to the class. So we'll be working here on the book author, and on that, what method we want to invoke of our Fluent API. In order to set the primary key, it has .hasKey, and then within here you can define the primary key. If it was only one primary key, we could have been like BA goes to BA dot and whichever is the primary key. This determines that author ID is primary key for book author. But in our case, it's not just the author ID, we also have book ID. So we need an object. So right here, we'll add a new, and within the brackets, first we will add the author ID, comma, we can say BA.bookID. This will add a composite key which combines of author ID and book ID. So we are getting ahead of ourselves with a little bit of Fluent API, but it is required if you have a composite key. So right here, I'll write composite key and let's add our migration. And I believe before we add this, if we go back to our presentation, we have one missing piece, which is add a list of book author in both of the classes. So if we go back, let me go to the book class right here. We need public iCollection. We can give it book author. Let's call this book authors, getters and setters. And we can copy this and we'll paste that inside our author class. So right here, we'll paste it as well. And let's add the migration. So we have add migration. This will be many to many. And it will be book and author relation with book author. Let's take a look at this migration. Here it creates a table called as book author. In the constraints, you can see primary key is a combination of author and book ID, and it has two foreign keys. First one goes to the authors table and the later one goes to the books table. Can you recognize one mistake that we did here? The mistake that we did is you can see it is adding book ID and book ID 1. Can you now identify why it is doing that? The reason is simple. If we go to book author, we do not have the foreign key reference here. So we just need foreign key, and this will point to book. And we need the foreign key, and this will point to author. You save this. Let's add a new migration here. And that should clean things up for us. You can see how easy it is to work with migrations. It is dropping the foreign key here, dropping indexes, dropping those extra columns, and it is adding the constraints of foreign key on book authors as book ID and author ID. If you make a mistake in migration, it is easy to fix. You just add a new migration after fixing your error. And now that everything looks good, let's update the database. This was one of the lengthy videos because we had to go through many-to-many relationship, which can be difficult to understand at first. Let me refresh the table here. And if we open up the book authors now and go to keys, we have two foreign key relationship, and columns we have book ID and author ID. They are both primary key as well as foreign keys. So great, we can see we have set up our many-to-many relationship, and in here you can see we had to use Fluent API in order to set up a composite key. So I hope you understand this concept of how to set up many-to-many relationship, and if you want, you should pause this video and give this one more try.